The Polar Grid X Pro may be over a year old at this point, but after testing it out over the past 6 weeks, I have to say it's still a pretty worthy choice among sports watches. With a very well built and durable design, long battery life, and large assortment of sports and health tracking features, this is a surprisingly solid wearable that I feel has sort of flown under the radar. And while the Polar Grid X Pro isn't perfect, especially at its current price of $529, it is still one that I think is worth considering. And if you're a fan of sports watches or fitness tech or just appreciate unbiased reviews that get right to the point without wasting your time, consider liking this video or even perhaps subscribing to Connect the Watts if you want to see more videos just like this. Okay, so first things first, the Polar Grid X Pro, when you take a look at it, it's obviously not going for a flashy look, instead opting for a much more subtle and sort of rugged design, which depending on your preference may be a positive or a negative. The bezel of the watch is stainless steel, though you can also opt for a more expensive version called the Grid X Pro Titan, which features a titanium bezel if you want an even tougher exterior. Both options though come with a sapphire glass lens, which makes the watch face very durable and resistant to any sort of scratching. And both options are rated for WR100 water resistance, meaning that the watch can go as deep as 100 meters. Now, the 1.2-inch display here, as is common for many sports watches with longer battery lives, utilizes what's called a memory in pixel or MIP display, which tends to look great and clear while outdoors, but doesn't always look the best indoors. Now, it doesn't look bad inside, but it's not going to pop with color like some of the other watches with shorter battery lives, like the Apple Watch Ultra. There's an always-on display option here as well, which can be turned on or off depending on what you prefer and how much you care about extending that battery life. And the main watch face features several options to choose from, which you can swipe back and forth from depending on which metrics or information you'd like to have displayed. Now, personally, while I don't think these options look bad, I don't particularly like that it is limited to just these options rather than offering a wider range to choose from like most other sports watches do. This just looks a bit plain, which again is fine, but sometimes it's nice to be able to switch up the look every now and then. Now, the purpose of this MIP display on the Polar Grid X Pro is for two reasons. One of which is to make the display easy to read while outside, and the other is to be able to provide that long-lasting battery life. And the battery life here is pretty solid, with up to 40 hours of GPS use and 100 hours of training use with its low power mode option, and with what they say is 7 days of general use. And after using it for 6 weeks now, I feel that is about right. I've had to charge it about 1 time per week, which is good. It's not as great as some watches nowadays, but it is much better than most and feels around where it should be at this price point. Also, like most sport watches, there are a large variety of activities to choose from, each of which can be highly customized from the app, from changing up your heart rate zones, adjusting automatic laps, and of course adding and editing various training views with whichever metrics you prefer to see. And within these metrics, Polar is also able to display and track your power output natively without any external devices, and there are a lot of great options to be able to analyze your power output in real time, so a nice bonus for those who prefer to utilize power zone training over heart rate zone training for running. And here the native power tracking feels pretty accurate. Again, you can't compare power numbers from one sports watch to another since there's no standardized algorithm, but I did find it to do a pretty great job of doing what I'd expect to do given my speed and incline on various tests, and did not have as many excessive jumps as I've been seeing on some of the other watches which also feature native power, so very happy to see that here. Now, while we're talking accuracy, I also found the heart rate tracking to be pretty dead on in general, though sometimes it would take a little bit to lock on in the beginning of workout, and on occasion there would be segments of about a minute or two where the heart rate tracking would fall off or jump up too high, but for the most part I found it to be very reliable. Now, in terms of GPS tracking, the Polar Grid X Pro is very good, though it only offers single band GPS tracking rather than dual band, which many of the higher end sports watches now come with. It does a good job either way, but it will occasionally struggle when compared to a dual band GPS option, especially when there's a lot of interference from trees or tall buildings or cliffs. And this, to me, even though it's not bad, it does seem to be the most outdated part of this watch at this point, specifically because of that over $500 price point, where most watches watches coming out now do have that dual band GPS option. Now, going back to working out with the Polar Grid X Pro, although it is a bit unintuitive at first, there is a workout builder here that connects to the watch online that I ended up really like using, and you can create workouts based on duration, distance, calories, race pace, or even create your own interval structures with parameters like specific heart rate zones or power zones. Then when starting a workout on the watch, you can also easily add and adjust reminders for drinking and carb fueling. Now, the Polar Grid X Pro does include routing and turn-by-turn guidance, but in order to do so, you can't easily just use any app like Strava, but instead you pretty much have to use the app Komoot if you want an easy integration. And since there's no internal map storage on the watch itself, you just have to sort of follow along to a line on the watch without seeing anything else like the general area or the topography. But what is nice here is that you can start the route from any starting point, from the beginning, the end, or the midpoint, and at any time. Even if you don't have a route that you've selected that you are following, you can choose to reverse the exact route that you have taken so far, or you can even choose just to beeline it back to your original starting point, which is a bit strange as the beeline option sort of just points you in the general direction that you need to go and leaves it up to you how you want to maneuver around any trails or wherever it is that you are running. Also, when doing a workout, you can choose to broadcast your heart rate via Bluetooth to other devices or retrieve heart rate from certain devices like heart rate straps. Now, unfortunately, it is Bluetooth only, so if you are a cyclist or somebody who needs ANT plus support, you won't find that here. Now, while you're working out, the Polar Grid X Pro also allows you to control music that's playing on your phone. And while this is nice, most decent earbuds also do this exact same thing and can be controlled more easily. And since there's no way to save music onto the watch itself, that is also a bit weak point given its price point. Now, in addition to training, there are also a variety of fitness tests that you can take on the watch, including a fitness test to get your estimate of your VO2 max, a leg recovery test, which tests your max height vertical jump to help assess your readiness and leg recovery, and an orthostatic test, which is pretty much just a more accurate heart rate variability or HRV test that also requires a Polar heart rate strap. Now, speaking of HRV, Polar also tracks HRV automatically as night, as well as your sleep and breathing rate, to help put together what they call a nightly recharge assessment to give you a quick evaluation on your recovery for any given day. And I actually found this to be done really well. The HRV scoring, which can be found under the ANS charge, gives you more detail about your nightly HRV than pretty much any other watch that I've ever tested. And I found Polar to be one of, if not the best when it comes to accuracy and useful HRV tracking. Really, the only other wearable that I trust just as much to determine my HRV automatically at night is Whoop. But in terms of GPS sports watches like this, Polar is the only one that I have found to be anywhere near this reliable, and that is a huge plus. Because if you're somebody who likes to track recovery like me, HRV is going to be one of the most important metrics that you track for your fitness and health, and it's really beneficial to have that data be as accurate and reliable as it is here. The sleep tracking also seems to be pretty decent and in line with pretty much every other high-end wearable that does good sleep tracking. Now, sleep tracking on wearables at this point in time is never going to be fully accurate, but I think this is very much in line with other good options like the Oura Ring and the Apple Watch, and a bit better than others like Garmin. So overall, I think there are a lot of great things about the Polar Grid X Pro, and while it's showing its age at its current price point without having that dual band GPS support and no ability to download internal music, it is still a very strong option, especially if you prefer a more rugged and reliable sports watch. Another big plus, as I mentioned, is that excellent HRV and sleep tracking, which for me sort of makes up a bit for everything else that the watch is lacking. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This is Colin with Connect the Watts. As always, appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next time.